And over 2 years ago at UNIDO, we launched the Global Program for Hydrogen in Industry, which, with a small delegation, were represented here at the Oman Sustainability Week for the first time. And we will be walking you through, in this session, a publication that we launched recently on making hydrogen policy, but it is complemented with a training focusing on hydrogen industrial cluster guidelines that we're delivering today and tomorrow. Thank you once again for joining the session. As I mentioned, this talk will be focusing on green hydrogen policy making. I will try to make it as relevant as possible for the Omani context, because Oman is one of our 172 member states. We have had a long-standing cooperation with Oman and the government of Oman, most recently in developing the manufacturing strategy, and now also in discussions around green hydrogen. Why is UNIDO working on green hydrogen? Because we believe that the potential for decarbonizing and developing and promoting industrial development through green hydrogen is enormous. In the slide, or in the graph that you can see here at the left-hand side, the priority and the maturity for technologies in industrial applications for hydrogen is the highest. Refining, chemistry, steel making, and heavy transport are the areas where the technology is available and the economic business case is the strongest. And those areas are at the core of our mandate. And we believe that with the promotion of green hydrogen in these sectors, we can really achieve substantial reduction for CO2 emissions in those sectors that we cannot electrify otherwise. In many sectors, hydrogen is the only way to move forward in a low-carbon environment. And when we made this presentation, 45 countries had already realized this by adopting their national hydrogen strategies. This number has increased since, and we believe that there's more countries to follow. The example that, for example, has been set by Oman as well through an ambitious hydrogen strategy, but in many of our other partnering countries as well. I will be walking you through the document, but I first want to give you a high-level idea of what we try to achieve with the policy toolkit. The policy toolkit essentially firstly makes the case for looking at domestic markets first before looking into export markets. We believe that industrial development in countries is only then possible when countries first think about how they can use hydrogen and producing low-carbon products with hydrogen before thinking about export. Something that we learned over the past few days is also something that Oman has been very focused on in the strategy. We furthermore believe that hydrogen holds opportunities for countries not just to develop future industries, but also to decarbonize industries that are already existing. And this is something that the policy toolkit focuses on as well. And it focuses, besides national stakeholders, as well on international cooperation and the opportunity for developing these international partnerships. Behind me on the slide, you see essentially an overview of the hydrogen value chain. We try to structure the policy toolkit along the hydrogen value chain, starting also in the presentation later on the upstream side, and then moving from midstream further to downstream to look at different technologies and different policies that can enable market development and production for hydrogen at these various stages. But we also look at addressing the challenges. And many of the challenges you are acutely aware of. There is still a lack of clear market uptake. By extension of that, there's still a lack of market prices. There is a lack of reliable infrastructure that doesn't allow companies to plan their investments because they don't have any reliable way of understanding what the transport of hydrogen will be looking like. We have environmental and social risks. We have technologies that in some cases are not fully mature. And through the policy toolkit, we try to enable policymakers to address all of these various challenges, focusing on infrastructure, on production, on facilitating industrial development in the hydrogen sector. I want to get us started with looking at what we call the Clover approach. The Clover approach essentially gives an overview of the key messages that we try to develop with the hydrogen policy toolkit. The first pillar is the dual approach, meaning that we would encourage policymakers in the partner countries to look, besides export markets, also very strongly into local use. Because the local use is what enables the actual economic development, which enables countries to move away from extractive industries, which helps countries to move away from just having a raw product that is exported, but actually having and developing value added in the country. The gradual approach, which you see on the right-hand side, recommends countries to go from medium-sized projects and medium-sized companies to larger investments and larger projects, by also not relying solely on foreign direct investment, but looking at capabilities that are laying within the country and looking at the various existing industries that a country has to then further develop from the smaller or medium-sized domestic companies to larger projects that would be focusing export. The integrated approach comes from the strong history that we as UNIDO have in developing industrial policy across various different sectors, and we realize that no matter what specific sectoral strategy we develop at UNIDO or we develop toolkits for, it always needs to be integrated with the economic and industrial development vision of a country. Because without integrating and weaving hydrogen into the overall picture for industrial development, for manufacturing and for economic development in the country, there is no way of developing hydrogen, because it requires big investment, it requires mobilization of a wide range of actors across ministries, across sectors to really get this going. And over the past days, when we were speaking to various stakeholders here in Oman, we realized how strongly, through the focus of localizing value chains for renewable energy, for instance, there is an understanding in the country that it needs a wider approach than just thinking about hydrogen, but also the localization of the value chains and products that are needed to produce hydrogen. The installation of solar production, the negotiations around localizing wind production are key enablers of exactly that approach to integrate industrial policy, manufacturing, development, and hydrogen together. Another, I think also for Oman, very interesting way to think about hydrogen is the phased approach, is the approach to first think about what is there in terms of industries that are currently reliant on fossil fuel, and how can those be slowly transitioned? Because it facilitates the economic, it creates a better business case, it makes it easier to look into specific industries and understand where is the economic incentive and the business case the strongest, and to have a sort of approach where you slowly look with the capabilities that the country has. Oman, for example, very strong in SMR, in steam methane reforming, production of gray hydrogen, to depart from this and understand how can we pivot this process that is very reliant on natural gas, and how can we pivot the process and use the capabilities that we have through that process for producing green hydrogen. This is an overview of the contents of the policy toolkit. I suppose that you can't properly read it from the back. It starts essentially with the upstream production of renewable energy and the renewable energy policy that is necessary. It then moves on to talking about the midstream part, understanding what is the pipeline infrastructure that is relevant, what is necessary in terms of transmission infrastructure, and so on. and then moves into the industrial application of green hydrogen across the various industries. Chapter 6 looks into international cooperations, memorandums of understandings between governments between various governments. I understand that there's a MOU that has been signed, for instance, between Switzerland and Oman. Those are basically international partnerships that can help to, adding onto the domestic industrial policy, move further towards export markets, for instance. I spent quite some time talking about the various focuses of the Clover approach. I would therefore just keep it rather short and just give you various examples of what we have put together as recommendations for the various steps along the value chain. For the production of renewable energy, we have, and I highlighted it here in the presentation, a focus on local content requirements, something that, in my understanding, has been a focus as well in the strategy development for Oman with the renewable energy value chains that we discussed. Also a strong focus on how can we enable through policy and how can we create incentives for local research and development. And how can we also think about the impact of green hydrogen and green hydrogen projects on other sectors, on agriculture, on food security, on water. In many of the countries that we work with, water scarcity, as in Oman, is an issue, and agriculture at the same time is very important. So we discuss with stakeholders how, for example, renewable hydrogen can produce excess water for agriculture, or how can excess electricity be made available from renewable hydrogen projects for communities. Those are just various policies that would target, on the one hand, the social and environmental aspect, but on the other hand, also create economic benefits for people, for instance, through the long-term research and development and local content requirements. Those are just examples. The document is actually very comprehensive and lists a long list of various policy options that I encourage you to look into. On the midstream part and on the transport of hydrogen, we discussed earlier the clarity and the reliability and the existence of infrastructure that needs to be in place in order for investors to come in. We at UNIDO currently discuss very intensively the South H2 corridor, the corridor that connects Algeria through a gas pipeline all the way to Germany. A project that is very important for many of the countries and investors as they rely on that export route and the use of the hydrogen for their investments. And so this chapter focuses on how can we reduce investment risks and mobilize public and private support, create financial mechanisms that can in turn support infrastructure and also work towards value chain integration. One specific focus, and I mentioned earlier, the industrial cluster guidelines, the training that we're conducting together with my colleagues Petra and Lewis at the moment, is integrating the production of hydrogen in industrial clusters. Many of these exist in Oman, some are planned, some are already existing, but industrial clusters basically have the great advantage that they create an industrial symbiosis where the transport and the infrastructure aspect is not as important because there's already, the industries are closer together, transport over longer distance is not as necessary, and the industrial sort of proximity for the various industries from production, transport to end use just creates these extra efficiencies that we think are very important. Moving to global partnerships and international collaboration, how much time is there left? Because I don't have a timer on the screen. Would it be possible to? Okay, 2 minutes. Thank you very much. I'm sorry, because I don't want to take away from the next speaker. So let me then just close with the various important initiatives that are out there in terms of facilitating international cooperation there. We usually say that there is enough money for hydrogen out there, and there is enough interest in supporting hydrogen. There are two essential problems. In many cases, there is still a relatively high risk for financing or risk, like perceived risk, that that basically doesn't allow for banks or investors to invest into hydrogen projects. But then a lot of the times is also the matchmaking and the understanding of what is out there in terms of projects and what are the specific requirements for financing that are not quite aligned. And we joined hands with IRENA and with the World Bank to really facilitate a dialogue between projects and investors in the development banks and partner countries to create synergies and to mobilize financing and climate financing for investment hydrogen projects. Let me close. Oh, all of these slides I wasn't aware of. Let me close by just showing you our website and our LinkedIn. The publication can be downloaded at hydrogen.unido.org. It's called Policy Toolkit for Hydrogen Policymakers. My name is Sven Schuppener. Thank you very much for your attention.